Okay, we start today with the lectures on Daniel, the book of Daniel, and I'm especially interested in the prophecies of Daniel. So there are other parts in the book of Daniel that you can read and think about, but I'll only concentrate on the prophecies of Daniel. In this lecture, we'll just start with the background to the book, to the person of Daniel. And for today, you have read, I assume, chapters 1 to 6. For tomorrow, I'd like you to read from chapter 7 to the end. You can leave out chapter 9. Chapter 9 we'll do on Friday. So chapter 9 you can leave out if you want to. But I'll appreciate it if you can, for tomorrow, if you can read from chapter 7. Okay. Will they come in when the door is closed? That will not be a problem for them. Once out. Okay.
Nu wel.
Okay, so we start with the historical background. Is it large enough for everybody? Yeah. Shouldn't we make it slightly larger? Is it okay? Come, let's make it. Can we maybe make it slightly larger? Yeah, because some of the slides will be slightly more information. Just a little bit. Okay.
Like that?
Yeah, that's better. Let's just make sure everybody can see. Okay, so we start with the historical background. It's extremely important to see the historical context in which the book of Daniel originated. There's a lot of history in Daniel, and especially in tomorrow's lecture we'll discuss quite a lot of history. Today we'll just start with the background. So the first thing of importance is the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, in 721 the 10 tribes, the northern tribes, were taken into captivity by the Assyrian king. And we talk about the Neo-Assyrian Empire because there were also an old Assyrian Empire that was operating in the Middle East in the 2nd millennium BC, earlier. After that came the New Babylonian Empire. Again, we talk about the New Babylonian because there was also an old Babylonian Empire, and that empire was operative in the Middle East about 1,000 years earlier. It was a great and mighty empire, this one also, and during this time of the New Babylonian Empire that Israel was taken into captivity. There were 3 times that Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem. The first time that he came to Jerusalem was in 605. When that happened, it was during the reign of King Joachim. He was king at that stage. You can go and read these text references. And that was the time when Daniel and his friends went into exile. So Daniel, with his friends, were taken into exile at the very first time when Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem. And this date is very important, 605. Make a note. So we'll see many dates, but this date is of particular importance. There were 2 other times that Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem, again in 597, during the reign of King Joachim, and that was when Ezekiel went into exile. The prophet Ezekiel. He was still a young man, and at that stage he was taken into exile. And then the 3rd time was again by Nebuchadnezzar, and that was also an important date, 587. That one was when the city was taken, and when the walls were broken down, and the city was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in the reign of King Zedekiah. Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. That was a terrible period in Israel's history. They went into exile, everything, very few people stayed behind, and those that stayed behind later, most of them went to Egypt with the prophet Jeremiah. Now, the Babylonian Empire, the new Babylonian Empire, that did all these things to Israel, Babylon fell in 539 BC. And it was taken by the Medians and the Persians. So it was first the new Assyrian Empire, then the new Babylonian Empire. At the time of Nebuchadnezzar, he was not the first king of the empire, but it was the first king that engaged with Israel, that conquered Jerusalem, and after him were some more kings, and then in 539 the Medians and the Persians, they conquered Babylon. So Babylon fell. In that year, the last ruler of the new Babylonians were Belshazzar. The Bible also refers to him. He was son of King Nabonidus. So the king, he was ruler, but Nabonidus was king. And he ruled in his father's stead. There were some kings who will come back to this, but the important king here is King Cyrus. And why is he important? Who would know? Why is he important for us, for the discussion? For Israel. King Cyrus. Why is he important? He's a very important figure in Israel's history. Why?
So they they're going back?
Yes. He was the one that allowed Israel to go back to the country. Okay. So this is sort of an overview of the period in which Daniel lived. He was taken in exile at the first time when Jerusalem came, when Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem, and even in the King of Kings, in the period in the reign of King Cyrus, we still read in the book of Daniel that some of his visions he had in that period. So this is he became an old man. We'll just now talk about his person. So that brings us to the person of Daniel. Daniel was from the tribe of Judah, and he was actually of royal descent. So he was of the kingly family. That was also why he and his friends had such a major position in the Babylonian court. It was because of his royal descent. He went into exile to Babylon when the city of Jerusalem was taken in 605. He might have been younger than 20 years at that stage. Maybe 17 or so when he went in exile. So at the end, if you do the calculations, you'll see he was probably in his 90s when he died. And some of his last visions was also that he received at a very late stage in his life. He was at that stage also probably in his 90s. He held a high position during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and also later during the reign of King Darius the Median. Now Darius is important because he was the first ruler of the Medians and the Persians that ruled in Babylon after the city was taken. He's not historically confirmed by extra biblical sources, but the Bible is quite clear that he ruled in Babylon. So although Cyrus was probably the overall ruler of the Medians and the Persians in Babylon, it was this Darius the Median that was ruler. We're not sure how long he ruled there, 1 or 2 years. We know in the first year Daniel had one of his visions. Maybe he ruled for another year. I'm of the opinion that he probably ruled for 2 years. Okay, and then Daniel was called from retirement at the end of the reign of the last Babylonian king, Belshazzar, to become the third in the empire. Why did he become the third in the empire? Why this mention of the third in the empire? Who would like to try? Yes?
Because he described the letters on the wall.
Yeah, but why this third? I see your point. That's why he received that important position. But why was it not the fourth position or the second position? Why was it the third in the empire?
Because the king Nabonidus was first one and then Belshazzar and then...
Exactly, 100%. So he was just underneath the Belshazzar, who was not king, remember. He ruled in his father's stead. He was second. So Daniel became third in the kingdom. He was a prophetic statement. He was a great statement. If you think in our times, he would have been the prime minister. So he was the prime minister of Babylon, if we can use contemporary language. He had a very high position. He was a statesman. So that shows us that Christians can also fulfill important political roles in the world. We shouldn't maybe, some people think we should disengage. It's not necessarily a good thing. We should actually engage. But this is not the topic for today. He was a prophetic statesman. So God gave him these prophecies, even though he was a very mighty person in his own right. These prophecies focus on the political dispensations in the Middle East, which is quite interesting because he was a statesman. And his prophecies are mostly concerned with the political situation in the Middle East. And he had an irreproachable character. Irreproachable character. He was truly a man of God. Okay. So this brings us to the book of Daniel. We'll first look at the layout. The book has a rather simple layout. The first 6 chapters is the stories about events at the royal court. Various stories about things that happened at the royal court. We will not discuss that. We'll only discuss chapter 2. And that's the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. But the rest, you can read it, think about it. We will not discuss it because in this lectures we are only focusing on eschatology, the study of end times. Okay. Chapters 7 to 12 is the prophetic visions that he had. 4 visions are mentioned. The language in the book, quite a few languages are used. Hebrew, but also Aramaic. Aramaic was the language of the New Babylonians, or the Chaldeans, as they were also called. There are 15 Persian words in the book, 15. There are 2 Greek words in the list of music instruments. Now, some of these things are reasons why some biblical scholars think that the book was written at a late stage. But this is not necessarily any argument for that, because we know that Greeks came to Persia at a very early stage, and especially because it's found in the list of musical instruments, they came exactly in that capacity as crafters or musicians or all sorts of types of work that they did, specialized work. So they were present in the framework of the Median and Persian Empire at quite an early stage. So it just shows you the hybrid type of, it's a very hybrid type of character that the book has. And this reflects the historical situation. For example, the Aramaic. Now, Aramaic was spoken later on throughout the Middle East after the New Babylonians conquered such a large part of the Middle East. But anyhow, it's important that that is actually featured to such an extent in the book. The date. Daniel, as a historical person, is mentioned 3 times by the prophet Ezekiel. His contemporary. And he is in this regard mentioned as a wise man, as a very wise man. And the prophetic visions are ascribed to this historical Daniel. Daniel probably lived from about 625 to 534 BC, or even, it's possible that he even lived to a later date, to about 90 years of age. All the depictions given in the visions commence with events from this period. So there are various depictions, and all of them commence in the framework of the New Babylonian Empire. So it tells about events that will happen throughout history, the various different visions and so on. We'll discuss all of them in some detail. But what is important, they all go back and they commence in the framework of the New Babylonian Empire. According to the Jewish rabbinic tradition, the men of the great synagogue wrote the book. Quite an interesting tradition. We do not know how this book was brought together, in what sense. I personally don't think Daniel sat and wrote the book. Daniel probably wrote the different visions, which was collected together in the book. And in that regard, the Jewish, or the great synagogue, could have played an important role. So we're not sure exactly how the book came together in the present form that we have it. They may have compiled and edited the book from earlier copies. Any questions? You're free to ask me anything at any stage. Yes?
Is there also in other historical
Evidence? Yeah.
Yeah. Of Daniel as a kind of minister in that time?
There's no evidence. No. The only evidence is the references in the book Ezekiel. The book Ezekiel is very historically grounded. That's a good thing, because that makes a good case for historical Daniel. So the earliest references to the book. The earliest reference to the book was in the book of the Maccabees. Now, who have heard about the Maccabees? Okay. Very important in Israel's history. And the Maccabees were active in that period between the Old and the New Testaments. Between those two testaments, there's a long period, about 400 years, a little bit more, of which the Bible doesn't say anything. That was the period, a little bit later during that time, that the Maccabees were operative and active. And we will, in some of the later, especially tomorrow, we'll come back to them. We'll see in what regard they played an important role. But there are 4 books, and these are also not included in our Bible, but they are included in the Catholic Bible. In there, it's referenced to the old Matthias. He was the father of the sons. For example, the oldest one was Judas. And he mentions the fiery furnace of Daniel. So the book must have been known to him. And that was more or less in the year 170 BC.
What is fury?
160. Say again.
What is fury?
A fury. It's like fire. A fiery furnace.
I also don't know furnace. This is really...
The oven.
Okay.
Okay. So it's also mentioned the book is also mentioned by Josephus. Josephus has a story that the Jewish high priest is said to have known, to have shown Alexander the Great the prophecy about him. There's a prophecy in Daniel 8 about Alexander the Great. And according to Josephus, the high priest of the time showed this prophecy to Alexander the Great, and as a result, he spared the city in 332 BC. So this is just a story written by Josephus. It's not necessarily so that it's happened, but it's possible that it could have happened. So this is the historical references that we have to the book of Daniel. There are 2 ways to think about it, about the book. In these lectures, I'll give you a wide coverage. I give you all ideas, all opinions, all perspectives. Not everything, but the major ones. So the first view is by the biblical criticism. Now, what is biblical criticism? Now, nowadays, we talk about the scientific study of the Bible. Now, these people have brought this scientific approach to the Bible. So their assumption when coming to the Bible is that we should study the Bible as scientifically as possible. And in this regard, they bring scientific tools to the Bible. So what they say is, we must have evidence before we can believe it. So if you start from scratch in saying, first the evidence, then you believe it, then everything that's not proven, you will not believe. And there's so many things, especially in spiritual life, that is not proven. We believe it. That's actually what faith is about, is that we do believe these things. For example, the inspiration of the Bible. We believe in it. But how do you prove it? It's something that you believe. So this school rejects the inspiration of the Bible. They believe Daniel was not a real person. They believe the book was written after the events. These events, 1767 to 164, we'll come back to that. It's major impact events that had a major impact on Israel. And they believe that everything in the book of Daniel is actually historical writing. It's not prophecies at all. And everything fits in before that date. So the author of Daniel was not written prophecies. He was writing history. And they believe we were not very good at that. And we'll discuss the view in more detail. So they think that the events mentioned in the book were written after the facts, not beforehand. So they don't believe that the historical Daniel ever lived. They believe it's just tales about the court of the Babylonian kings. The evangelical view. This is the view that we present. In our view, the person of Daniel did in fact live, and his prophetic visions were real. You really had them. You really had them. There's no good reason to think that the book was written at a late date. Until this day, not a single good reason had been given why we should accept that the book was written at a late date. Okay. So the question is it a prophetic or apocalyptic writing? Yes?
I have a question. In chapter 2, the king wants Daniel to be the ruler of Babel. But then Daniel asked that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego can be that, and he stays in the court of the king. So what was his task then? Was he also?
Yeah, the Bible doesn't clearly specify at that stage. It wasn't the similar position because it was a different situation. Nebuchadnezzar was a very, very, very great and mighty king, one of the greatest of all times. And Daniel became his friend and had a high position, maybe also prime minister. But the Bible is not that clear what was his position. He had a very high position.
Yeah, because the children in the clip asked when the friends of Daniel didn't bow for the.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
Daniel.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. So he was even in that time. He had a very important position in the court of the king. But we should remember, in the framework of history, very little that happens in history are actually mentioned in historical documents. So if something is not mentioned, for example, the name of Daniel, it's absolutely no argument that he didn't live. We should just remember that. Okay. Archaeological data are very partial, very, very partial, especially in this period. They have certain data that helps them to date the events during the reign, but even there they have certain gaps that's difficult to fill. Okay, is it a prophetic or apocalyptic work? The Hebrew Bible is divided into the Torah, the prophets, and other writings. It's not like our Bible, it's different. The threefold division: Torah, prophets, other writings. The other writings, if you read in the Gospel of Luke, it starts with the Psalms. That's why it's also sometimes called the Psalms. The book of Daniel. Why was the book not grouped among the prophets? The book was not grouped among the prophets, which is quite interesting. It was grouped among the other writings, not among the prophets. So why would that be the case? Who would try to make a guess? The learned among you. Who would like to try? Why was it not? Okay, yeah.
Because the prophets prophesy against the people to repent, and also with promises for the future.
Okay, yeah.
And Daniel was not in that way kind of.
Exactly, yeah. He wasn't that kind of prophet. So also his writings are quite different from the other prophets. If you want to read, for example, Isaiah or Jeremiah, even Ezekiel, you'll find that Daniel's style is radically different. What is different in Daniel's style? What is the major thing that is different in Daniel? If you just think about it, just broadly, if you think about the book, what is different in the book of Daniel from the other books, from the other prophets in the Bible?
It's about the kingdom and different kingdoms, earthly kingdoms.
Yeah, reference to earthly. Jeremiah also refers to other kingdoms. You remember that he actually, the Lord told him to send the cup of his wrath to all the nations. So he also engaged, Jeremiah actually engaged quite a bit with the other nations. And throughout the Bible, all the prophets, or most of the prophets, also had prophecies about the surrounding peoples and even further nations that lived quite far from Israel. What else will we try? How, in what sense is Daniel different? Yes?
He prophesied about the future.
Well, other prophecies is also about the future, isn't it? Something else? In what way is his prophecies different? Think about his prophecies.
They're so specific.
Yeah, some other prophecies are also specific. Jeremiah said 70 years. It was 70 years. You can make a calculation. I think we'll come to it. I'm not sure, but I think we'll come to the 70 years. Yes, we'll come to it. So I think that's quite specific. You're close. Yeah, he had this particular visions. And a lot of symbolism in the visions. Seeing animals and all sorts of things. So visions played a very important role in his prophecy, which is not found by the other prophets. Okay, so maybe the reason why Daniel is not grouped with the prophets is because of the different style. The book of Daniel was nonetheless still part of the canon. It was still divinely regarded as divinely inspired, even though not included with the prophets. So that's not a reason to see the book as of less importance as the other prophets. It was merely the style that's reflected in there. And there's no consensus as to when the canon was accepted as complete, maybe since the late 3rd or early 2nd century BC. That's more or less what I think most scholars would think at this stage. So this brings us to apocalyptic literature. This is a name that the scholars give to this kind of literature. Apocalyptic literature may be regarded as a genre of prophetic writing that originated after the exile. Daniel is the first person to use this style. It's originated after the exile, and it's a genre, there's a certain type of prophetic writing. But it's not the same as the traditional prophetic writing. Apocalyptic works, they are distinct for the following reason. There's a particular division of history, a use of symbols, a revelation of secrets, a pessimistic view on the present, and the accentuation of God's future intervention. So this is a typical definition of apocalyptic works. We should differentiate between extra-biblical apocalyptic works, because in later ages, there were different books that also followed this style, but which we don't regard as divinely inspired. For example, one of the books in that style is the book of Enoch, or the Acts of Enoch also, and some other books, but especially these. It's quite interesting that the book of Enoch actually referred to in the Bible. That book was quite highly regarded by the brothers of Jesus. That's why it's Jude, the brother of Jesus, that actually refers to that book. It's very, very interesting to study the early church and see the role of the brothers of Jesus, especially James and the other brothers. And Jude, the one that we're talking about. The biblical prophetic books in that genre is the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Again, let's go to biblical criticism. What is their way of thinking with with regard to this. They reject the divine inspiration of the prophetic and apocalyptic writing. So they do not believe that it is divinely inspired. For them, that's not scientific. That's what we normally would refer to that from our perspective as liberal scholars. So they don't believe that the prophet could have written about future events beyond his own time. They ask the question, how would he know the future? He's just a human. He can't know the future. It's totally impossible. So if nobody can know the future, there cannot be something like prophetic writing. Remember, they have a scientific approach. So this is what science says. Nobody can know the future. But what do we believe? Evangelical Christians believe in the divine inspiration, which goes beyond the insights and interpretations of the biblical authors. It goes beyond them. God inspired them in a way that was beyond their own understanding. They, in many cases, didn't even know that they were referring to future events. For example, the Messianic Psalms. The prophetic writings, therefore, may refer to events far beyond their own time. And why do we believe in it? Because we believe, and we'll see this in the book of Daniel, God knows the future. And the wonder is that God reveals it to human beings. Isn't it wonderful? That God reveals the future to men. And this is what prophecy is. The godly revelation of things to come. So I think if you can distinguish between typical and the older type of prophetic writing and the apocalyptic style in prophetic writing, this genre, it's quite important. And if you engage with people that know a lot about eschatology, one of the first things that will come up in the discussion is the question about apocalyptic writing. So not all apocalyptic writing is prophecy. Why not? Which are not prophecy? Which apocalyptic writings would you not regard as prophecy? Corinne?
What are all the apocalyptic writings then?
Are prophecy. Not all.
No, I mean, what are, from which can I choose?
Just say again.
Yeah, I don't know, what is apocalyptic writing then?
Okay, there's a certain kind of writing. Apocalyptic works, there's a particular division of history. So normally they divide history in a certain way. So they would say we can divide history in various eras and so on. Furthermore, they use lots of symbols. Visions are quite important, and symbols. There's a revelation of secrets. So normally there's some heavenly book. We also read in the book of Daniel about a heavenly book. We'll come to it. And this book presumably is not available to humans. So it's secret, but it's revealed to us through Daniel. There's a very pessimistic view on the future because of the exile, the difficult period, and there's this great hope that God would intervene and would change the situation. So this is the typical characteristic of apocalyptic writing. So now my question is, not all apocalyptic writing are prophetic. Some use this style, but they were not divinely inspired. They merely use it. It's like somebody that tried to predict the future. He's giving himself out as a prophet. But he's not a true prophet, he's a false prophet. The Bible actually distinguishes quite a lot between false prophets and true prophets. So you can have people that's trying to predict the future, but they're not prophets. In the same sense, we have apocalyptic writings that is not divinely inspired, it's not prophecy. And my question is, give me an example. I mentioned one. The book of Enoch. Or the Acts of Enoch. Okay. But the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, which follows more or less the same style, we can call them apocalyptic if we want to, but they're prophetic writings. They're divinely inspired. So they adhere to the style, but they're primarily prophetic. They're divinely inspired. And that's the difference. So not every book or every kind of literature that follows a certain style is prophetic. Okay. True prophetic writing is divinely inspired. God reveals it. When it comes to Revelation, we'll see the same thing. Strong apocalyptic style, but there's no doubt that the intention of the book is to reveal the future. It's prophetic. Okay.
Can you give an example then? Can you give an example?
Well, these are the most well-known books. Yeah. Others are, and then the Acts of Enoch also. So these books were actually interesting because they were written in the name of Enoch. You remember the biblical Enoch?
Mm-hmm.
And they were written in his name. So these books is said to give visions that the biblical Enoch had, who lived about 4,000 years, 4,000 years earlier. So these authors in this book present the book as if there was a certain tradition that goes back to the biblical Enoch and has transcribed these visions that he had so long ago. Would you believe it? If somebody today writes a book and he has all these prophetic visions that Jesus had, would you believe it?
No.
Why not?
It would be earlier then.
Yeah, it's 2,000 years, and why have we never heard about the book before? You see, so we don't have any other extra biblical or any evidence about such books or anything in this regard at the earlier stage. Yes.
Like Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
He also
Exactly.
wrote that and
Good example. Yeah. So he gives him out as a prophet of God, and he refers to all these earlier tablets and things and so on. You see, so the moment that somebody refers to some visions that some earlier person that lived long before him has had, we are critical. We should be critical. I think what is important is that believers should not just believe. We should also be critical in our belief. We should not believe anything. You get people that just, if people present it to them as something that Christians should believe, they believe it. They don't think about it. And that's not a good attitude in my view. We should be critical. That's a basic thing. The Lord has given us on top something here. Thinking ability. And thinking ability is to be critical, to evaluate, to decide for ourselves whether we can accept or reject. So we should think. If I can inspire you in this series of classes in these 3 weeks, just to become thinkers. Christian thinkers. That's what we need in this day and age. Christian thinkers. We've got a lot of followers, people that just go with the stream, that don't really think about things. Because in our engagement with the world outside, people are informed. The biblical criticism has taken over the playing field. By far the most people are informed. They read on the internet. And if you go to Wikipedia, so if you are interested in prophecy and you go to Wikipedia, what would you find? Which view is presented there? The biblical criticism view. This view is not even mentioned. So everybody knows this view. So if you engage with people and they are informed about these things and you know nothing about it, how on earth are you in any way going to make a difference? You will not be able to make a difference. You can pray for those people and the Lord can miraculously work in their lives, but I can tell you, in the general way of God's workings, He uses us in our interaction, and if we don't have any knowledge of these things, we won't be able to engage with those people successfully. We won't be able to lead them to Christ. And most people today that are really informed about things, they know these things. So you should have arguments, and think about it for yourself, and work it out for yourself, and engage with the topic. Okay, I think our time has run out, and I think we can take a break now.